Hello, friend. The things that I think is important to take away from all this is that we have to not just leave it here, that there'll be an opportunity to create an action plan so to disseminate this type of material into our communities and really start to hopefully make a difference in that. So James, I'm gonna start with you. I came to this, you know, I've been vegetarian for about 5 years and became really just plant-based it's been about 5 or 6 months, but I still can't disarm a man with my bare hands. So how much longer do I have to eat kale before I can take people's guns away with just my hands?
Well, it's funny actually, because there's people out there on the carnivore diet trying to rebut the film and saying that we made out that all you have to do, they said the claim that we made in this film, that all you have to do to become an elite athlete, top of your field, is just eat plants.
Doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't work. You have to put in, you got to put in the training.
How did you, what was your position? You know, you're a guy, you're a tough guy, you're working in the military. What is your position on this idea of plant-based or vegan, or what was your impression of that community? What did you learn through the journey in that community, and did it change your impression?
Well, yeah, I mean, I absolutely thought that if you were vegetarian or vegan, you had to be long-haired, you know, skinny hippie hugging a tree. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It just didn't sort of, it didn't feel like me, you know?
Right.
I don't know if you can get that from, yeah.
I definitely got the no long hair. So yeah, I get that.
Yeah, I could grow it if I wanted.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. It's very manly.
Yeah. But no, I thought that basically you couldn't build any muscle. I thought that you only got protein from plants. And I remember walking into a restaurant.
You mean animals?
From animals.
Oh, I'm so into plants now that I can't even.
Right, exactly.
So yeah, I thought you could only get protein from animals. And I remember walking to a restaurant and the chicken was spelt funny before I got injured. And I said, "Why is the chicken spelt like that?" They said, "Well, it's made from plants." And I said, "Well, where's the real meat?" And they said, "Well, there isn't any." And I said, "Well, what about eggs and, you know, dairy or something?" They said, "No, this is a vegan restaurant." And I looked at my buddy who's like 6'5", 260, bodybuilder, and we looked at each other. This is before all this happened, and we literally walked out. I mean, I wouldn't have had a single meal without, you know, animal protein in that meal. So it just totally flipped on the head, you know, when I started really digging into the research.
That's remarkable. Rip, I'm going to jump in with you now. You come from this from a slightly different perspective. He's coming at it as an elite athlete, as a fighter, as somebody who's trained in the military. You're a firefighter. Your father is a cardiologist. Were you following this when you got into firefighting, and how difficult was it, the culture of the firehouse, to insinuate a more plant-based approach in that regard?
So I was hugely inspired by my father and his groundbreaking research at the Cleveland Clinic. He was not a cardiologist.
Not a cardiologist.
He was a general surgeon, and it's interesting how somebody from outside the field of cardiology almost had to show cardiology what was possible, right? And maybe you can address that, and in some ways maybe the ignorance in cardiology, but
I don't know if I mentioned earlier, he went to Yale and he went to Harvard, I think. So you knew all this. Your father had imparted that to the family.
Yes, he had, and I actually ate this way to fuel me as a professional triathlete for over a decade.
Wow.
And then after doing the triathlons and then deciding it was time for me to grow up and get a real job, that's when I became a firefighter, right? And that's when I introduced this lifestyle to Firefighter 2 in Austin, Texas, after a fellow firefighting brother of mine was basically a dead man walking. 344 total cholesterol, 344.
Wow.
And every male on the father's side of the family perished of heart disease before the age of 50. So, yeah, we were able to bring this to life in the most unlikely place imaginable, a firehouse, in Texas.
That's amazing. Nick, speaking of, so Nick is a firefighter right now. His mustache is plant-based. It's interesting. It's not hair.
It's true. It's actually green. I dyed it black for the occasion.
That's right. His mustache is entirely Swiss chard. So Nick, like, listen, man, we've spent a lot of time in these firehouses. It's the kind of thing that's going to get your balls busted incredibly hard when you walk in with that. You know, how did you swim against that current, and you know, how did you decide to stick with it to the point where you're literally running marathons now?
Are we talking about the mustache or the plant-based living?
Plant-based.
You know, for me, it just came down to the science, and I took a chance. I did it for a week. I had dramatic results. Everything I said in the movie was true. And despite the fact that I was working out constantly, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was a healthy guy. My cholesterol was approaching 300, and I was too young for that. And the doctor wanted me to take statin drugs, and that was enough for me to stay committed. Once I saw the results, I didn't care what anybody else said, because I thought the proof was in the pudding, so I stuck with it. And I got guys in the firehouse, they're following traditions that they don't even know why. They still think that this is good eating, good living, and that's like they're entitled and they owe this to themselves to do it.
Right.
And I just seen a bigger picture.
There's a difference between facts and science and effectiveness. So I would turn to you now, doctor. Is the science indisputable? Is it something, because I'll tell you, sir, I was in a doctor's office, and there was a pamphlet in this doctor's office, and it was from the Mayo Clinic, and it said, eat heart healthy, help your heart and your cardio. And I opened it up, and literally the recipes were, it was like chicken marsala and chocolate lava cake with low-fat whipped cream, and I'm like, that's from the Mayo Clinic. So where's the disconnect, and is the science as indisputable as it may appear?
Well, as Rip was saying, I'm pretty ignorant about a bunch of things, but I'm a little less ignorant now about nutrition and health, because we learned so much from the amazing work of your father, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, and a lot of us in this space stand on the shoulders of him and his great work. And so, you know, I've been a cardiologist now for about 15 years, and outside of a medical emergency, like somebody gets shot and has to be put back together again, I've never seen anything come close to the breadth and depth of benefits that a plant-based diet provides. Now, in terms of the science, it's incredibly compelling. There's a whole breadth of evidence in regard to plant-based nutrition, from basic science studies, test tube studies, to randomized studies, to observational studies that support eating more plants is better for a variety of types of health outcomes. And you know, I don't know if this was said in the film, but like, you know, if I told you that there was a pill that can, you know, reduce heart disease, lower your blood pressure, reduce diabetes, improve erectile function, reduce your rate of stroke, you know, that would be the best-selling pill of all time ever. And we kind of have it, and it's broccoli. And so there is wide consensus among nutrition researchers that being almost exclusively plant-based, like, you know, maybe 85%, and people quibble around the edges. Is 96% better than 98? Is 100% better than 99? There is some question in those areas, but in my experience, my patients, and this is echoed by multiple research studies and the incredible work by Dr. Esselstyn, those who go almost exclusively or fully plant-based have the most unbelievable turnarounds you've ever seen. So there's wide consensus around the majority of it, backed up by the American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology, Association of Clinical Endocrinologists, and it's, you know, around the edges that people will quibble.
So this brings up an interesting point, because I think so there's two things that go along with this then that immediately jumps to mind. One is compliance and the difficulty of compliance. And is that one of the reasons why it's not more spoken about through there? But the other part is, you mentioned it earlier, which is pushback, muddying the water. So, you know, you said now people are coming out and they're attacking the science in this, and they're pushing back on it. Are you in the pocket of big salad Like, is that what's, you know, what is the reasoning and why is it that you're, you know, I would not see this as a controversial movie. I would never look at this and think, oh, wow, people are really going to, you know, come back at this. This is very controversial. And yet it is. In your mind, why is that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, you know, for example, the day, it seems a bit too much of a coincidence to me, but the day before the film came out to the public, there was a study that came out in the Annals of Internal Medicine that said, eat as much red meat and processed meat as you want. These are the new guidelines. Well, usually an independent company doesn't give you, or a research body doesn't give you the general public guidelines, right? That's left to like the World Health Organization or the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. And so you've really got to dig into where is that research coming from. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's essentially funded by the industry, right? So you've got the industry funding studies, you've got the marketing coming out, they're trying to sell a product. And you've also got people that have just tied their identity to certain things. So the carnivore diet is sort of becoming a little bit more prominent now, the keto diet. When people are sort of tied to that identity, that's another way you're going to get pushback because they just, you know, what did you say, facts match feelings, you know, so if people feel a certain way, then they try to make the facts match those feelings rather than really looking at the evidence. So pushback from industry and then pushback from people that are sort of just tied to their identity, basically.
So Rip, you know, how do you look at this as not, how does, because when I look at this, I think, okay, that's not a fad then. If the science of something, it's like saying walking is good for you. This isn't keto, but how do you keep a plant-based diet from being viewed as another fad diet that is out in the marketplace to sell us a pipe dream of something along those lines?
Well, as you said to James, right, he's not in the pockets of big salad. You know, there's, to me, this is to me the most, and I've been in this deeply for the last 32 years, but this is just a simple truth. And to me, when you can part through all the noise and the clutter, it just seems so bloody obvious to me. It's frightening. And I don't know. I mean,
Right. I mean, Nick, you're the one who had to deal with it. So you're on the front lines. These guys are working in that space, so they deal with it all the time. You're just in a firehouse. How hard was it? How hard is it to maintain?
It's not hard at all. I don't think it's hard at all. Once you see the results and it happens fast, I think that's motivating and I think it's thrilling because the sky's the limit, really. I'm not the only one that was benefited by this. My father lost 50 pounds in about a year. He was on 4 medications, now he's on 1. It's half the dose. So I'm not the only one. It's like I was influenced by Rip. The movie was a huge part. I'm proud to be like even involved in it in the small way I was. And it didn't end there. Other people that I know that I care about are directly benefiting from this lifestyle.
Right. So what's the pinch point then? If this is, if it feels like obvious science and it feels like something where compliance is not a huge issue in motivation and especially once results are seen, what do you see as the pinch point? What's holding it back? Because I'll tell you, for me, you know, look, I was telling these guys, you know, when I first met my wife, I was more corned beef than man. Like I was, you know, I was a brisket guy, corned beef. I smoked a lot. Like it was, I loved it. What were we talking about? 'Cause I was just thinking. But like, you know, this has been very different. But I feel much better. But like, it's a difficult. You know, when I sit and I watch the football games now, and I see a plant-based burger being advertised during football games, something's changed. Something's turned. There's a momentum here, and how do we capitalize that, and how does that continue through?
Yeah, well, there's a few. I think we built the film. I mean, James's journey was documented for almost 7 years, And we actually filmed 50 athletes and 50 experts, and about a dozen of each showed up in the film. I think that the stereotype busting was fundamentally important as a pitch point. We needed to deal with this idea about protein in plants, what we're built to eat, like what our natural setup is for, some of the other myths that have been propagated by industry about estrogen and soy and carbs and that stuff. Because if you actually look, like, do a deep dive on how a lot of this mythology start, it always goes back to the industry and where it's crazy. Even this red meat study that came out, I was like behind the scenes researching where the funding for it came from, and it's like pretty explicit when you really dig around. So that's the first thing, is to shatter the myths that are blocking people. I think the second thing is making it accessible, which is a big problem, because my brother-in-law Evan said that his fire chief went plant-based, but said it was like having a Tesla with no plug-in stations, because he'd be out in a call and stop at a corner store and want, you know, a meal or food, or Tim Hortons, which I don't know if you guys have those here, but like.
It's like a Dunkin' Donuts, but more polite.
Yeah. So for him, the barrier was a little bit about accessibility, and then I think the bigger one will be the cultural shift. And this is the thing we're seeing. I don't know if any of you have already started following us on Instagram and stuff, but you see these conversations like Kai Green, the runner-up, Mr. Olympia, talking to Hap Thorsch Bjornsson, the Mountain from Game of Thrones, the World's Strongest Man, and all these soccer players, and they're all starting to talk about it like, why don't we try this? And that's when the top-down thing is going to be really powerful. It's got to be a little bit of ground up, but a lot of institutionalized stuff as well. It has to just be, there's probably 10 levels it has to happen at. You have to go to the grocery store, there's Hungry Man, there's a plant-based version. It has to be the corner store, there's the pepperoni sticks, and then there's something better. There has to be a different conversation, yeah. There has to be a plant-based, guys have to view it differently when they go out for dinner, and it's
Right.
like,
It has to insinuate into the economy. And that's where I think, so this is why it's important. One of the reasons we wanted to have a lot of medical professionals from the area in here is when it gets to you, I think one of the crucial locus points for people is their hospital, their physician. That's where they are focused on, you've come to them for a reason. Either you're not feeling well or you're getting checked out. And how do we educate the physicians? And do you find cardiologists that don't have the proper information? And how do you address that? And how can we maybe as a community come together and formulate a plan to help? You know, we moved to this area about 6 years ago. We like these people. We'd like them to live longer, not just because it would obviously drive our property values down, but so how do we accomplish that?
Those are great questions and very difficult answers. And stepping back for a moment, I think if you think about science and marketing and entertainment, you know, a vascular imaging study, that doesn't sell, but sex sells. And you guys have made being plant-based sexy with this movie, and that's part of helping to change the discussion in popular culture in the world, and it help us take a big step forward. Now, in regard to the medical system, you know, med school, residency, fellowship, all that stuff, I learned almost nothing about nutrition. And if you told me about plant-based nutrition when I finished up my training, I frankly would have thought it was weird. And so we're barely taught it in the medical system, and things are beginning to change now, but nowhere near as much as it needs to be. So I learned about this much after I finished all of my training. And so it's really been wonderful. I work at Montefiore, a big hospital system in the Bronx, and we've brought plant-based nutrition to our outpatient clinics, to the inpatient clinic. We've got plant-based meals that you can order for inpatients, and the documentary film that's almost as good as this one, Forks Over Knives, plays on inpatient TVs on continuous loop that we can share with patients to watch. They serve this food in the inpatient cafeteria. And we have an educational arm and other things, and all of those things took a lot of time, a lot of conversations, a lot of education to help make happen, and it's events like this tonight and the incredible film here today that accelerate this process. So to help physicians learn more about it, I think that, getting nutrition-related questions on board exams, getting continuing medical education credits for nutrition, making that even a mandatory thing. There are lots of wonderful ways we can bake it into the medical system. There's public health initiatives like California passed a law where it is now mandatory for the hospitals to offer plant-based meals for inpatients. They don't have to order it, but you at least can offer it as an option. And New York is poised to hopefully sign something similar. So there's public hospital partnerships to help move this kind of stuff forward. And in a community, so I think it's education. Within a hospital, it's really having a physician champion who wants to move this forward, and it can happen. And if anybody is a physician or a healthcare professional in a hospital anywhere, please reach out to me. I'll be happy to share our experience and tell you exactly what we did, good stuff, not so good stuff. And we published an article about it that is sort of meant as a how-to. So I'd be happy to talk to anybody here about that. So please reach out to me.
You did get resource cards that have information where you can reach out to a variety of people and keep this conversation going, because I think it's an important one. Last thing I'll say, and it's again to you before we open it up to some questions, is do you think that the absence of that information is purposeful in the way that, look, drug companies have sales representatives and they go to hospitals and there is an economy around the industry of fixing these ailments through, pharmaceuticals in a way that, kale doesn't have a lobby.
I mean, there's no big broccoli, So yeah, it's hard for me to precisely metric that, and I'm trying not to dive down the sort of conspiracy theory rabbit hole, which, it could very well be there. And yeah, I mean, there's clearly a profit motive. And I mean, if you take a 500-foot view from a conspiratorial angle, you can say, look, like the food industry is making us unhealthy for the first 40, 50, 60 years of our life to then service the medical industry, which will do tons and tons of tests and things because of what we've done over the 30, 50 initial years of our life. So there's really quite a potential conspiracy aspect to it. But, I like to think that we're better than that largely. And, I know docs go into medicine because they really want to help people. They want to do good. So there's probably some element of that, but.
And it might not even be conspiracy. It may just be systems are incentivized sometimes to outcomes that are not grand design or conspiracy, but unfortunately we have to view some of the way they are incentivized. Do we have questions from anybody within the audience?
I was just going to mention one
James.
thing, since we were talking about sort of the education of healthcare professionals. So the film's actually, for any healthcare professionals here, the film's been accredited by the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. Mm-hmm. So each year, healthcare professionals, doctors and nurses, things like that, have to get ongoing education credits, and they can do that by, now that they've watched the film, they go onto the American College of Lifestyle Medicine's website, take a quiz, and they get some...
By the way, their football team is terrible. I don't know if you've been to the American College of Lifestyle.
Can I add one thing?
Go fighting lounge chairs. They're awful.
So I'm on service this week, and I've literally assigned the residents, medical student fellows on service with me to watch this movie. But now they can get CME credits. That's awesome. I didn't know that.
It's available in about a week or so.
Okay. They get there.
My name is Mary. I'm a professor here, and I also work for nutritionfacts.org and Dr. Greger. I'm his media director, so hi. I wanted to ask for the people in the audience here who are not plant-based, what advice you would have for when they leave today, if they might be feeling a little bit overwhelmed by what they saw in the film. What are the next steps for them, especially the students here? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question.
You know what? I think you should go to GameChangersMovie.com And they have, seriously, they have the most amazing information, resources available online. Second right there might be engine2.com, but it's phenomenal. What do you think?
Yeah, well, our philosophy is all or something, not all or nothing. And I think that the idea of prescriptive change, like we'll tell you exactly what to eat and here's your exact meal plan, isn't as effective as we might have hoped, and that adaptive stuff is important. So start it, own it, make it whatever pace you want, whatever goal you have. If it's 100%, 50%, 20%, it's your business, nobody else's. And I think that's like really fundamental, because this movement has pointed a lot of fingers at people. 100% this, or do it for the animals, or you're a murderer, or you're going to die if you eat, this much egg white or whatever. But the reality is there's gray areas in everything, and it's your business. So I think all or something is our big approach.
And yeah, go ahead.
These are phenomenal resources, and I would just not let perfection be the enemy of good. And there's plenty of data out there that even there's an incredible study where they looked at it was like 200,000 people, 3.5 million person years of follow-up. Like if you follow me for 1 year in a study, that's 1 person year of follow-up. This is by Dr. Song on Archives of Internal Medicine, or 2016, I think. Anyway, so 3 million person years of follow-up. And they just asked, if you replace just 3% of your calories from animal protein with 3% of calories from plant-based protein, is that good? Is that not good? It turns out it was good. If you replace just 3% of your calories from animal-based protein with 3% of calories from plant, you lived longer. And they had so many people in it, they were able to slice and dice it by different kinds of animal proteins. So, processed red meats with, 34% lower hazard of death, red meat 12%, dairy 6%, fish 6%, poultry 6%. So perfection should not be the enemy of good.
I can tell you as somebody too who's come to this and evolved over a long period of time, like I just, for myself, because eating is a very personal thing to people, and I think it's really difficult to preach to somebody accusatorily about the way that they eat or what their like everybody is different. And there was a time for me where I remember going to Taco Bell and I got the 7-layer burrito because I was like, is that vegetarian? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, I'm killing it. You know what I mean? Like, that's, and I think for me, it was just an attempt to do a little bit better for myself than I did the year prior. And if that just meant, I stopped going to that one barbecue place every Sunday. Like, that was just something, you can make incremental change for yourself. This isn't one of those like, join our group or be cast aside. I think it's not like that.
Thank you for this great presentation. So I'm a surgeon about to turn 61 in 2.5 hours.
2.5 hours?
No applause.
Oh
No
my
applause.
God. Oh,
Thank you.
I got you this for your birthday.
That's right. Is that plant-based? Okay.
Yes.
So here's the thing, is my observation. So great idea, but I had two areas. One, when we start to advocate for plant-based diets, one of the slides I saw showed the atherosclerotic process versus the normal artery. So one question patients are going to ask, are you going to see a reversal of my atherosclerotic disease? And the most important thing is many of us are physicians here or healthcare professionals. When we look at changing behavior, just like this, and this is very important, many of our patients are not able to maintain it. So you folks are great advocates, but how do you recommend that us putting that message forward to get people engaged and keep people involved and maintain and not relapse? Thanks.
Well, those are great points. In regard to the atherosclerosis, in some cases you may see the plaque shrink, In some cases, you may not. But what almost always happens is the plaque becomes healthier. The artery becomes healthier. The endothelial cells are able to make more nitric oxide, making you, the turbo engine that you were when we were 12, 14 years old. It stops us from turning ourselves into clunkers. Although the plaque may not shrink, the plaque will get healthier. In some cases, it does shrink. And as you know, even if the artery opens a teeny little bit, blood flow is related to the fourth power of the radius. So a little bit more opening, a lot more flow, and you can feel a lot better. And of course, there's all kinds of other ancillary benefits. So I certainly don't promise my patients that their plaque is going to go away, but I do feel very confident saying they'll become healthy in all kinds of different ways. And I don't know if you guys want to comment on compliance, or I'd be happy to talk about that too. So behavior change is like the holy grail of medicine, Like, we all kind of know that eating kale is good for us, but getting ourselves to do it is the hard part. So I'm by no means perfect at it. I have plenty of patients who give me the Heisman for like 3 years, and then maybe they'll come back the next visit 20 pounds lighter. I'm like, what happened? Like, well, I finally decided to listen to you. So I'm like, all right, cool. So what we do is we take a multi-pronged approach. So there's in clinic, I'm like you guys, I have to churn through, I have 40 minutes for new patients, 20 minutes for a follow-up. And do all the usual stuff, medications, H&P, all that stuff. So we educate them during the visit. I have specific handouts I give them with checklists of exactly what I would like them to do. We have these Saturday morning sessions that are 4 or 5 hours long that we don't charge patients for. We take a deep dive into it, modeled after Rip Esselstyn's father, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. We have patients come back in every couple of months just for a blood pressure or a weight check, more for accountability than anything else. And we try to have their family member come with them to help them along the way. We outsource a lot of the education. We ask patients to watch the game changers. You only have so much time in the clinic, so it really helps to reinforce it. So we take a multi-pronged approach to try to help people move along the way. And we have plenty of people that are on the wagon, off the wagon, who blow me off, don't blow me off, but we try with all those different tacts.
I was going to say the reason I think some of us stalled is because I think being a healthcare provider is probably one of the hardest positions to be in, because getting people to even I don't do, when I go see my physiotherapist, and I don't go home and do exactly what they tell me to do, but because they say you are the 5 people you hang around the most, not the one that you see however often. So that's a big part of it, and that's a big part of our goal with the film, is that people, male or female at gyms or athletes, start to see other athletes, and it starts to become socially accepted, and that changes very quickly. Look at how quickly people embraced paleo stuff. They cut dairy right out. They cut, legumes, horrifying, and whole grains out. And there's guys and men and women, I was 50-50 when I last looked, but eating berries and meat. And so they're actually, if people are motivated and the people around them at the gym are motivated and whatever, it actually can happen. But without that sort of support, it's challenging. So that's a big part of it, is getting the people around you to at least let you try it. And if you can bring 1 or 2 of them with you a little bit, that's proven to be even more effective.
Yeah, and it really takes a village, I totally agree. And that's one of the amazing things about tonight. Each of you is doing incredible stuff with your health, your families, your communities, and then seeing the amazing stuff in this film, when you leave, you can bring that to your community and start to change things in your neighborhood, in your home, where you work. And it's powerful. That's incredibly important. And one other thing we do in our clinic is we try to find a hook for patients. Do you want to come off your meds? Do you want to walk your child down the aisle? Do you want to lose weight? Do you want to improve your erectile function? Something that is meaningful to them, and sort of wrap the story of plant-based nutrition around that.
Yeah. And let me just say, don't make this more complicated and difficult than it has to be. This can be the most simple thing to implement ever. Most Americans rotate around maybe 2 to 3 breakfasts. Find 1 or 2 plant-based breakfasts that you love, oatmeal with some fruit on top, and you're set for breakfast. Most Americans rotate around maybe 3 different lunches and 7 different dinners. There's no variety whatsoever. The plant-based universe is limitless. And if you want to keep it simple like Jon, you can keep it simple. If you want to like go crazy like James, you can do that. But it's there's a variable smorgasbord of delectability out there at your.
That is a sentence you don't hear a lot. There is a veritable smorgasbord of deliciousness.
Basically, fusing athletics and nutrition would be pretty massive, because catching people when they're younger is really important rather than catching them when they're already unwell.
I would say too, you're in this community here. You've got Monmouth University. You've got the entire hospital network there. The fusion of those two, I think, is probably a tremendous amount of opportunity for there to be some synchronicity between the medical community that exists here. It's a really it's a wonderful hospital network, and then you marry that with a university program, and suddenly you've got something where that communication is going back and forth, and both systems are benefiting from it. So I think that's something, when we talk about continuing this conversation on, I would encourage anybody who wants to do that to contact us through the foundation so that we can put those groups together. People at the university here that are interested in this, people at the hospital that are interested, and let's get these groups together and start building that. Because I think it's, as Rip was saying, I think it's simpler than we think.
I'm a cardiology fellow at Jersey Shore. I had a question about such a diet with pediatrics, like toddlers or infants. Because you're basically talking about adults all the time. I just want to know about safety and efficacy if you want to start earlier for prevention.
Yeah, I think it's never too late to start and never too early to begin. That's a great question. I'm an adult cardiologist, so I don't dive into pediatrics too much, but a couple of points along those lines is the Association of Nutrition and Dietetics, the major dietitian association in the U.S., says a plant-based diet can be helpful for all life stages, including pregnancy and childhood. So I'm not a pediatrician, so it's not an area I know a ton about, but there is a podcast that you may be interested in listening to. It's called Nutrition Rounds by Dr. Danielle Bellardo. In one of the episodes, she interviews a plant-based pediatrician who goes through exactly all those issues: pregnancy, infancy, toddler, etc. You can find a lot there.
And Dr. Benjamin Spock, in his latest edition of Baby and Child Care, which is the 7th best-selling book on the planet, recommends that after the age of, I think it was 2, that everybody should eat a predominantly whole food plant-based diet.
I'll say this, those movements can be difficult. When people have a singular focus, it can be difficult. And to be honest, when we got into this, it was probably more from the animal perspective. And I think we found within that movement some of the most compassionate and interesting and intelligent people we ever met, and then some of the most dogmatic and rigid and difficult people we'd ever met. And what I liked about this film is it did give different perspectives from, there's a piece of it that's about animals, there's a piece about the environment, there's a piece of it about health, there's a piece about it about economics. And I do think that approaching it through that more holistic lens rather than a litmus test, and you said don't let perfection be the enemy of the good, I think is exactly right. I think that if we stop judging each other with this and just deal with it on the basis of actually aiding each other, I think we'll all find ourselves in a much better position when we move along with that.
I'm a pediatric oncologist and hospice and palliative care specialist, and I've been fortunate enough to work with a lot of families who have progressive physicians who recommend plant-based diets. What I get from feedback from their parents is that it's not affordable and that the foods go to waste and they can't feed all of their kids, even though it's prescribed for the critically or chronically ill patient, that it's intended for, well, really what we think is that all children should be moved towards this type of diet. So how do we, we're looking at elite athletes with star power and money. How do I get this to every child that needs it?
I mean, my understanding is, and I could be very wrong, but that meat is the most expensive element in people's diet. In that like a rice and beans or a plant-based diet is actually cheaper, but I don't know that.
Yeah, we love to say that this is really peasant food. And when it comes to beans, when it comes to whole grains, if you don't have to buy an organic yellow bell pepper at Whole Foods for $4.99 a pound to eat this way. And literally, this can be the most economical, cheapest way to eat on the planet. If you can't do fresh, then do frozen. Frozen is incredibly nutritious and wonderful, and it never goes bad. You should see our freezer at home between the spinach, the kale, the black-eyed peas, the raspberries, the strawberries, the peaches, the cauliflower, the broccoli. Really, it's phenomenal.
But why are they saying? Because if that's not the case, then where is it
I think they do want to go to Whole Foods and get the higher end things. I think it's a spoilage thing, that the food goes bad more quickly. And I also think it's a convenience thing. Like we were saying, availability in stores,
really
and getting it to the people who live in this community and want to do what's being medically recommended for their children. So it comes up. It's such a resonating theme with my families that I have to believe it to be impactful.
Yeah.
I don't know if you figured this out yet, but I'm the most socioeconomically average person on this panel.
Nick cannot even afford sleeves. That's how bad off this man is.
And I'm about almost 3 years deep. It's not a challenge. I'm aware of those apprehensions. It's a piece of cake. It is peasant food. Rice and beans is way cheaper than meat and chicken and fish. And availability is the key. If you could do your shopping in bulk, so it's always there, it's convenient for you at home, it won't be a problem.
I do think she brought up an interesting point though, which is I think when you make change, people don't switch something out that's less convenient for them then, and I think we've gotten to the point where people don't really cook in the manner that they used to, and fast food is food now. And I think if inroads aren't made into that market, I do think it's always going to be lagging behind because people are busy, and especially I can imagine in communities and hospitals, the families are under tremendous stressors as far as economics, time, and emotional stress. And I think we have to figure out a way to insinuate it into the economy of ease. You mentioned earlier it's like a Tesla without a plug. I think we've got to get more plugs.
Yeah, and I think we also need to recognize that there's a big difference between people who can afford it and have time and those who don't. So
Yes.
a lot of the athletes in our film actually grew up in inner cities and said that it's food deserts basically, and fruits and vegetables are very expensive for them. And they don't have time. The single mom comes home and doesn't look up cabbage per pound versus whatever, and isn't antioxidants, and it's not. It's like get some mac and cheese on the go. Kids are hungry. Got to move on. So those are other things that we try to incorporate is in sort of an intersectional approach to this, not like top down. Go shop at Whole Foods or whatever, but that we need to accept that there are barriers for people from different backgrounds, and that it's not.
How do you use those?
Yeah.
As a 42-year-old woman, second generation vegetarian, and now vegan for 11 years, I can attest that there is some differences in when you change diet from vegetarian to vegan. There is a period of what I come to realize is close to a withdrawal when you ditch dairy. Have you guys experienced anything like that?
I felt like I had the flu for the first week. When I went full plant-based, I did feel like I had the flu. It was the same when I quit smoking. It was the same thing. But after that, I had this weird rush of, I guess you'd call it, happiness. Which I had not experienced in the past. And and I did enjoy.
I've definitely heard that before, and cheese is a particularly difficult one for our patients to come off of. And for the nurse practitioner, I work in the Bronx, and about 85% of our patients who come to see us at Montague are on some degree of public support, and so we work with them to be creative about ways to buy in bulk and frozen and not organic, and be happy to talk with you about some things we do after. And so cheese is addictive. It actually has casomorphine in it. Morphine, it's like a cow morphine. And it's addictive. And if you think about it teleologically, it kind of makes sense. Like you want the calf to kind of chill out when it's nursing for months. It'll keep nursing. But so if you take the milk and then you concentrate it, you've got like concentrated casomorphine. And then of course they're tossing in like salt and other stuff to really trigger all those receptors. So it's actually addictive. And so it can be a bit of a process coming off of it. But taste buds do change after a month or two. But that's why sometimes I'll ask patients to go all in, and whichever, if a person wants to go part of the way, that's great, but I also ask patients to go all in a lot because it takes a little while to break the addiction, and if you go just halfway, you're not really breaking it.
Interesting. We, on the panel, like to call cheese dairy crack.
I can see that. That's why now I don't eat cheese, but I do smoke Swiss. All right. Well, first of all, I want to thank our distinguished panel. Let's give them a nice round of applause for being here at University, for helping us to arrange this. But mostly, I would like to thank my wife, Tracy, whose passion for this has got... Where'd she go? Oh, there she is. Honey. Thank you. If you're thinking about what's a good way for me to turn to a plant-based diet, having her stare disapprovingly at you while you eat, really effective. But thank you guys. Let's not let this conversation just die here tonight. So I urge any of you who are within the medical community here, let's please, they've got the resource card. Please reach out. I'd like to connect our community with their community and with the college community, and we could really build something very special. So thank you all very much for coming out tonight.